And now, marine weather around Alaska.
For tonight, we've got next system here bringing wind and rain again into the southern panhandle, slowly spreading northward, especially after midnight. And tomorrow, that gets all the way up by the afternoon into northern Lynn Canal, Haines area, up the Klondike Highway, probably in the form of snow there, with rain and snow to the south, and then just plain rain out toward the central and southern coast over toward Hyder. Otherwise, periods of rain continue tomorrow, but not very real light rain here into Kodiak Island. Chance of snow over the southwest interior. Not much change over the remainder of the state. And for Monday, next big storm coming in onto the chart down here, well to the south of the North Gulf Coast, or the Panhandle, well off to the southwest there. But that front pushing up, so increasing wind and rain again. Keeping that wet, windy weather pattern going over the Panhandle, and even an increase in the winds here across southern Alaska, but winds stay light up to the north there, all the way to the Arctic coast. A little bit of light snow possible this week trough here from the St. Lawrence Island area through the Bering Strait into the Chukchi Sea. And for the coastal water forecast here for tomorrow, south winds 20 to 25 knots. For the south coast, central coast, southeast at 25 knots. And east winds at 15 for the north coast. Lynn Canal, north winds 20 knots. Stevens Passage, southeast winds 15 knots. Small craft advisories for Clarence Strait, southeast at 25 knots with 9-foot seas. And then for Monday, good gales here on the south coast, out of the southeast, 40 to 45 knots. Central coast, east winds 30 to 35 knots, and east winds 25 to 30 knots up along the north coast. Clarence Strait, southeast winds 30 knots, seas up to 12 feet, and north winds 15 knots for Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal. Prince William Sound tomorrow, north winds at 15 knots, and for the eastern North Gulf Coast, north to northeast winds 15 to 30 knots, northeast to 20 for the western coast. Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, southern Cook Inlet, small craft advisories for northeast winds at 25 knots. Northern Cook Inlet looking at a northwest breeze at 15 knots. And then for Monday, Cook Inlet, north winds 20 to 30 knots, northeast 30-knot winds for Kamishak Bay, north at 30 for the Barren Islands. And for the North Gulf Coast, northeast winds 30 to 35 knots. And Prince William Sound, winds will be northeast at 20 knots with 5-foot seas, 3-foot seas. And Kodiak Island, northeast winds 20 to 25 knots, 7 to 9-foot seas. Alaska Peninsula, north winds 20 to 30 knots. And north winds at 15 knots for Bristol Bay. For Monday, northwest winds 30 knots for the Alaska Peninsula and 25 knots out of the northwest for Bristol Bay. Kodiak Island, northeast to northwest winds at 30 knots, seas up to 11 feet. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, north to northwest winds 25 knots, north to northwest winds 30 knots for Adak and Atka. And then winds becoming more west-northwest and diminishing out here over the western Aleutians from Kiska to Shimia down to about 20 knots. And then on Monday, gale warnings here from Shimia all the way to Amchitka Island for northwest winds at 35 knots. Central Aleutians, west at 20. And mostly a northwest wind, 20 to 25 knots there for the Fox Islands. And for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, north winds 25 knots tomorrow. Yukon Delta Coast, northwest at 15, northwest 15, St. Matthew Island. Light north winds at 10 knots there, St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound. And for Monday, Pribilofs, northwest winds 15 knots, 30-knot northwest winds here for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast. West at 20, St. Matthew Island. Northwest 20 for the Yukon Delta Coast. And 15-knot northwest winds for St. Lawrence Island, as well as Norton Sound. And for the central and western Arctic coast tomorrow, brisk wind advisories up in this area for those east winds at 25 knots. More variable and lighter here for the Chukchi Sea and the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east-northeast at 15. And then for Monday, Chukchi Sea, south to southeast at 10 to 15 knots, east 20-knot winds for the western Arctic coast. And then the central and east side up there, east winds at 15 knots.